Evolution MX may be familiar to some of you, or maybe not to all of you. So this is our fully integrated construction management solution software designed specifically for the construction industry. Today, we're going to be focusing specifically on the subcontractors ledger, the management of your subcontractors, and the ability to stay compliant with the required legislation. So the subcontractors ledger sits within the integrated suite of modules. The menu, if I just open it up, will illustrate the options available to us. So we'll be able to use this to maintain details of our subcontractors. We can keep the compliance side of things up to date as well. So in terms of the UK, we've got coverage for the CIS requirements. That would include things like the verification process, communicating with HMRC to get the V numbers back from them to enable you to know what rate of CIS is to be taken off any payments you make to them. Similarly, the return or the monthly return, the CIS 300 can be submitted to the UK Government Gateway using the software, so no need to go externally for that. And production of things like the monthly statements will be available to you as well. For the Republic of Ireland, because I know we've got people joining us from there as well, so that will cover the requirements there for under RCT. That involves the contract notification process. So informing Ross when you are engaging a subcontractor on a particular contract, you place an order, you then get the site identification number or the SIN number back from Ross that updates your system. And then the preparation of invoices and certificates to be paid to subcontractors, you can advise Ross of that so they can advise you of the prevailing rate of RCT to use, and then the production of the RPNs or the revenue payment notifications back to Ross. So all of that legislation is catered for to keep you compliant with the requirements. In addition, of course, we've got things like the reverse charge VAT, which came in a little while ago. So that allows you to maintain the requirements under that to handle the reverse charge situations. Okay, now the menu is available to you to go into various aspects, which I'll go through this morning, but you might choose to have the information available to you through the use of dashboards. Now, dashboards are throughout Evolution MX. They're not just for the subcontractors, but here illustrates an example of what you could use to provide you vital information about your subbies. So these individual tiles have been placed together onto a dashboard, and it's up to you what each tile contains. It might be reminders. It might be summary totals to do with reporting information. It might be graphical representations. So you've got the ability to use the configuration option here to be able to say what you want and at what place. Okay, just by delving into the detail that you know is sitting within your subcontractors. So using some of these tiles to access information, the subbies insurance due tile, for example, I've configured that to say I want 7 days of notice, or maybe the next month notice of when a subcontractor's public liability insurance is going to expire. So you can set the parameters on that. If I click into it, it'll give me information about the 15 subbies who I maybe need to chase information about. This provides information through what we call an analytics report, and you've got control over the content of what might appear there. So you can easily use the plus field there to be able to go and browse the other fields of data, which might be relevant for you to have included on this particular view. If I just select the email address, then that can be added to the view. And then you can save that so it's always going to be there for future reference. Maybe even save it as a different variant so that you personally like that view, but other people maybe want to see it in a different way. I can just flag that now as my preferred view for that particular screen. In a similar way, you can drill down on information relating to transactions. So through my pie chart in the center of the screen there, if I click on that, I could go down into my subcontractor balances, where I could see information relating to my subcontractors, beneath which I might want to go into more information on a particular subcontractor, whichever one that might be. So on the Helix 01 subcontract, for example, I can click into that to go into subcontractor information. Now, this might be just to view the documents that I've got for that subcontractor. This could be all the documents that Evolution MX is generating for you. So things like the payment certificates could be made available. And a little preview screen in the bottom right there, the payment certificates, the remittances, and so forth. So all of those can be made available through the central subcontractors management. If you want to add anything at any point, then you can just move the screen out of the way, go and drag something else that you've got maybe sitting on your desktop, for example, and then that can be placed alongside the other records within the subcontractor database. So that means you're not having to rely on links to information elsewhere. Everything is central and is available to you in one place. And you can have various different folder headings there, so you can segregate and have insurance documents and other certifications could be in a particular area rather than all being cluttered into one place. Okay, also from there, you could get into the transactional information. So if I wanted to open up the sub-menu there and go into the transactions relating to that particular subcontractor, I can see them all being shown there. Each of them then may have its own document associated with it that would be produced or saved against that transaction. So you can drill into that quickly and easily. If you prefer, you could also see that information in a different format. So as we've seen before, we can tailor the view that you're being shown. But even the information that's been shown, if it's a bit too lengthy to read through the 35 records being shown, you might prefer to use a group by option, which can group it by contract. So by job number, you can see the involvement you've had with that subcontractor on that particular contract. Okay, so that's accessing the information that's already there through the use of dashboards and your own user-defined reporting. Accessing the subcontractor records then that you'll maintain through the maintenance menu, we can call up there a particular subcontractor. This is where you'd also add new subcontractors or change details relating to them. So the subcontractor maintenance allows me to browse quickly to a selected subcontractor, and here you'll contain all the relevant information about this subcontractor. So for example, over on the far right, we've got their public liability insurance details and the expiry date. So it's that I was using to do the check for that tile to tell me that this and several others have got insurance which was likely to have expired. Other fields are relatively self-explanatory there, but others just to bring you up to date on. Across the top there, we've got different tabs. So if I go into the terms, this is where you could specify that ordinarily this subcontractor, albeit somewhat optimistically, might expect a 10% retention. That's just the default terms that you have agreed or understand to be the case with this particular subcontractor. Similarly for things like discount, that can be included. There's also scope here over on the right-hand side, the agreement date. That could be maybe the date you last validated or approved this subcontractor for use. Maybe there's an expiry related to that. So maybe you've got a practice in place that says every 12 months we need to just reapprove and revalidate the integrity of our different subcontractors. And that can produce you similar warnings to what we saw with the insurance side of things, for example. Across the top then, various other tabs of information. The tax tab, that's showing you the compliance that you've got with the HMRC CIS scheme. That's showing me things like the UTR details that you've already put into the system. And also further down, you've got details as to what their current tax treatment is going to be, and also the V number that currently sits within the system. There's a history button there as well, which would allow you to go back and see all engagements you've had with verifying the subcontractor in the past with HMRC. A similar screen would be available for subcontractors that are covered by the RCT scheme. Just a word on that, on the main tab, you do specify the regime within which a specific subcontractor would sit. So you can have a mixture. If you're involved with the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, for example, you'd need to have a mixture of subcontractors who are covering a combination of the two regimes, I should say. Also across the top, we've got other information that you can use. So the skills could be used for recording things like CSCS cards, for example, or any other trade qualifications, accreditations that you want to store, with details about any certificate numbers, expiry dates, any additional notes about that particular skill. You choose what the skills are. So we're not saying this is the library that you've got available and you have to use them. You can build your own choice of skills into this library for whatever purpose you might want. That allows you also to use the document button where you could grab a relevant image, a scan of a certificate, for example, or a PDF copy that could be associated with that skill. So that just stays within your Evolution MX data. So all these documents, we're not just creating links to documents elsewhere, we actually copy them into your Evolution MX system. So it's included within your full data backup. Other information you might want there, you could include for things like questions, have they been CRB checked and so forth. You can build up your own questions library here. There's also user-defined fields available to you, which is not solely for subcontractors, but in this case, these would be subcontractor-specific user-defined fields that you want to manage. Basically, that's fields that we haven't already catered for within the other tabs of information that you want to specifically use. User-defined fields, as I say, are throughout Evolution MX, and they are configured differently for each module. So the user-defined fields used on a subcontractor won't be the same that you'd have to use on the contract or a supplier, for example. Okay, now the whole basis of Evolution MX surrounds the subcontractor orders. Subcontractor orders, we can see if we just go into a subcontractor inquiry. So let's open up the menu there for sub inquiry. Now, sub orders are usually created through the purchase order module. but that doesn't necessarily have to be present. So there is a bypass, if you like, to be able to create a subcontractor order without having to use the purchase order module, but obviously won't create any documentations and won't send anything off to the subcontractor. So in the case of ABC as a subcontractor here, I've got a number of engagements. So each of these are subcontractor orders. Largely created through the purchase order module, which we'll come to in a second. But there may be instances where you might want to take advantage of the highlighted job at the top there, for example, a multi-job. So this is where you don't want to have to go to the time and trouble of creating an order for every single engagement you have for every single job for that subcontractor. You want to use kind of like a global or a catch-all order that you can use on any job for this particular subcontractor. So that's where the multi-job function comes in. In a similar way, you've got a timesheet option as well. So this would be typically where a labour-only subcontractor might flit around between a number of different jobs on the same day or the same week. So again, rather than having to use a separate order per job, you can just record hours against different jobs on different days using the same order. Other subcontractors you may not want to extend that option for. So on my UK ducting option here, I don't have a multi-contract or a timesheet order. Each of my orders are contract specific. And indeed, on some occasions, there are more than one order for the same contract. So my job number is 0737 there. We can see we've got the main order, but maybe the second order could have been a variation. For example, a VO that's required against the same contract, but you don't want to cloud it by including it within the same main job. So that's just a word on subcontractor orders. As I say, we can create those through the purchase orders module, which I'll do now for you. Okay, so leaving the subcontractors module for a moment and going into the purchase orders module. Some of you may have this or may not be aware of its capability. So within here, we've got a section for subcontractor orders. So if I was to enter an order at this point, we can first of all tell the system which job the order is for. So I've got a browse or search option at this point, or if I know a job well enough, I can just key the job straight in. I'll then auto grab the next PO number. So I'm getting purchase order number 157, and the system has been told to configure the prefix for that with the job number, in this case 0737, and also SC, being an indication this is a subcontractor order rather than a purchase order for materials or for plant hire, for example. Now I can record who's asking me to raise the purchase order if it's not me myself. The buyer record that's being recognised can have certain constraints on it if you wish. So you could be allowing people to raise purchase orders up to the value of, say, 25,000. If it goes above that, the order can be created but not sent to the subcontractor until it's approved by somebody in a higher authority. So those levels can be included. And they can be a different value level from the constraints you might have on material orders, for example. Okay, carry on with the input of the system. If I were to there browse for my subcontractor, I can use the F4 key just to browse on all my subcontractor records and find the one I want. I've got full comprehensive searching across the board. So you can basically find a subcontractor on any field of data, maybe their postcode, their address, their contact, whatever it may be. So let's call up UK ducting. Immediately I get told that there's a problem with their insurance expiry. Now in this occasion, I'm asking it to be a warning only. There is an option for you as a company to decide that you might want that to be a prevention. It may say, stop, you can't go any further. You've got to sort their insurance out before you go any further. So again, company-wide, you decide whether you're going to have it just as a warning or a prevention or neither. So I'm going to call up that subcontractor and use the category button at the bottom to be able to record what I'm covering on this particular order. Now, because this is an application-based subcontractor, I'm just going to confirm to the system that we are going to have an application for this particular order. Using the category button allows me then to build up the content of what I want using a library of what we call work categories. So these would be sections that you've got into which you can type your own required text as much as you want. You can use copy and paste to take it from somewhere else. So it just allows you to be able to copy information from an email or another document, for example. The value is going to be the value associated with measured work in this case. So we could be putting in the value there appropriately. The other figures that are coming up beneath are coming from those terms that we saw on the subcontractor. So there was a 10% retention. If you don't want that to apply on this particular occasion, you can reduce it or remove it. The VAT rate is being brought up as a suggestion as well, so that can be amended at this point. Equally, so can the supply fix cost head in this case. Over on the right-hand side, there's a discount that's coming through and also recognition of the tax calculations. So that means this line is applicable to CIS calculations, for example. Carrying on with the category then, I may want to select another option from my menu, and this is your choice of the work category library and in as much summary or detail as you want. So this time let's go for materials and say we're going to have a materials element on this particular order of another 1,000. Notice that on the right-hand side, this line has been set to be not included in the tax calculation, so it's not going to be subject to CIS calculations. Okay, the purchase order is taking shape now. If I wanted to check on its content, I could go to the preview button. That's going to allow me to see what the purchase order is going to look like before I commit to it. What it looks like is up to you. So this is just an example of what the out-of-the-box offering could do. We can easily add your company logos to it, and it can contain as much information as you want relating to what you keyed in on the purchase order. So any text you put on would stretch to include more verbose explanation of what you're requiring. There may be T's and C's included within this document, but more likely what we find people would like to manage their own T's and C's. So rather than having to continually require for the document to be changed to add in new T's and C's, we just say, maintain a T's and C's document separately. We'll set the system up so that every time you email out a purchase order, it automatically attaches your T's and C's. That means you can contain the content and alter them at your leisure. As long as you don't change the name of the file and where it is, it'll always be up to date as far as you're concerned. Okay, so at this point, I can use the print option, which will allow me to, in this case, email out the purchase order, but I may take the option to CC it. In so doing, I could incidentally just use the document button. That would allow me to drag and drop another document in addition to my T's and C's, for example, maybe a site plan or a copy of a tender document, for example, could be included with the submission of the email going out. In this case, I'll just print it, which will basically now confirm that purchase order. Okay, it's going to email it out through your normal email service. The blue lines there are just a copy of the document now being stored. That will now update against the subcontractor, so you've got a record of the order. It'll also put a committed cost onto the contract that related to. So by using the purchase ordering, you get that extra advantage. Any purchase orders raised do add to a committed cost, so you get early visibility on the contract of costs that are likely to hit that haven't yet happened. Okay, when it comes to doing the postings, you've got various options available to you within the subcontractors. As I mentioned earlier, we had timesheets. So that could be where you've got labor-only timesheets that you either want to input or you could import. So if you can collect that information on a CSV or an Excel file, we can import that information to make it easier for you to do. And that could form the basis for payments to those subcontractors. Others, on an invoice basis, for example, I've got an invoice register option. So if I were to go into that one, I could pick up a dashboard at that point, for example, all to do with invoices. This is telling me that in my circumstance, I've got 4 invoices that have been found to have come into a dedicated email address. So just ask your subcontractors to email you into sub-invoices at company name, for example, and they'll automatically appear as a to-do item on this orange tile summary. Click on the orange tile. It'll take you down to a summary listing of those documents where you can preview them and start to process them. Anything that doesn't come in directly to this email address, you can forward it on to it. And similarly, anything that comes in as a hard copy, you can scan to it. And it may be sharing the same email address as that you use for your supplier invoices, or it could be separate. Your choice. It's all to do with the setup. Again, this isn't the main focus of today. We do have separate sessions to do specifically with the invoice register, which we're happy to share with you or engage with you on a one-to-one basis. So for the time being, let me just pick up from the invoice register a particular invoice that I now want to process. Left-hand side, I'm seeing a full view of this invoice. Right-hand side, I'm able to populate the required fields. Now, this is using what we call entry-level invoice register. So it is expecting you to view the image of the invoice on the left-hand side, and you do your own input on the right-hand side. There is an option available as a top-up for OCR, or optical character recognition, which can do the clever bit. It can read the invoice, work out who it's from by virtue of things like its VAT number, and suggest postings to you on the right-hand side that you just then verify, validate, or amend. So that option is available. Again, we can revisit that with you on an individual one-to-one basis. So on this occasion, I'm just going to go in and say, I'm going to post an invoice for ABC, and I'm going to pick up on a particular order. So this is now accessing all of the orders that I've got for ABC that I showed you earlier. I can say, well, I know specifically it's for job 1035. So I'm just going to select that one to become the order that we're going to use. Okay, to confirm other things like the date and the accounting period, the reference could be the subcontractor's invoice number, for example, the total value included. And then going into the cost allocation will allow me to see the content of that order that was raised on the system, and I can now assign that value to the appropriate order lines. okay, as to whether it's going to be a combination of labor or materials and so forth. So on this screen, I've highlighted in yellow those columns that you're allowed to make entry to, because you may want to be affecting the current value of that particular line, the retention calculation and so forth. It's also showing you, for information purposes, what's previously been claimed on the same order. So if I just use this column, I can just double click at that point and say the full value on this occasion is going to be against my labor. Okay, it does give you a little warning just to say it exceeds the budget. So in other words, it's gone over the order value that you placed for that particular category of work, in this case, labor. So just again, it's a warning. Now at this point, you do have options to stall the processing of the invoice, for example, to place it on query, maybe because you need somebody else's advice on what to do with the invoice, or if anything to do with it for that matter, as well as maybe getting approval. So you can do that. There's also an option for you to be able to use a little notes feature. So if you wanted to, you just put sticky notes on to accompany the posting. Okay, if you wanted to do that. So that allows you to process the invoice and then make a posting to it, which will affect the balance on the ledger and also the actual job costs. It's asking me if I want to split this, because it's recognized that there's actually 2 pages on this particular file that's come in, and it may be that I need to split them off, as I'll do, just so that I've got the ability to deal with any subsequent pages as a separate posting, rather than assume it's a 2-page invoice. Okay, so that's using the invoice register to make a posting through onto your subcontractors' balances. With applications, it's slightly different. So we've got the option to make a posting and then have it subject to authorization by the QS on commercials department. So we're going to involve the AOP module. Some of you may have this, some of you may not. So it's an additional module which you can involve with the application process specifically. So what I'll do first of all is I'll just make a posting of an application through the subcontractors ledger. Okay, that's going to allow me to specify who the sub is. So let's call up UK Ducting again. Again, I'm being told about the insurance expiry, the contract or order that we want to post that against. Let's use the new one I did with you a few minutes ago. So the 2.5 grand sitting there on order number 157. I'll call that up, record other information, maybe the subcontractors claim number, maybe there's another document that you want to recognize in association with this that's been received. Just say OK. And then it'll ask you purely for a sum figure on the application. So how much has now been requested by virtue of that application. And no more detail required at this point. If there had been a previous application, it would be showing for you. So you can put in the new cumulative, or you can put in the movement for this particular application. So it allows for subsequent applications on the same order. I'll just say OK. It doesn't ask for any more information at this point. It will then post that. And it's up to you whether that posts it purely as memorandum against the subby and the contract, or whether it does update the actual cost on the contract. Again, it's one of those system options you've got available to consider as to whether you want the true cost of the contract to now be updated as a result of that application. Now, because I've invoked the authorization of payments process, it's automatically put it onto a to-do list of the relevant QS, because it's found that from the contract that related to that purchase order. Now, unsurprisingly, I am that QS. So if I were to go into authorization of payment, I'll be able to see a list of my required actions. So there's the one that we put on a few minutes ago, order number 157. I'll call it up. Now, as the QS, I've got visibility of what I want to do with it in the left-hand side of the screen. So I've got a number of columns representing the different lines that were on the order. So we could be recognizing we've got 2,200 as an application. How much are you now allowing for the claim to be recognized? So it could be less than that. So we can say it's 1,800. And in my occasion, there's nothing in terms of materials. I'm not doing anything on the materials side of things. You can see the calculations have been made. They are amendable at this stage if you wanted to. Similarly would be the ability to write off. So if you're writing off the remaining 400 quid because it was over ambitious in the first place, or maybe you leave it alone and pick it up on a later claim. Now, if you are making a partial payment, you might want to take advantage of the notes that you've got towards the bottom of the screen to put into the system any sort of subcontractor notes that could advise the subcontractor as to why they're not getting paid the full amount. Internal notes can be used for internal purposes only, just for reference as to why the payment has been lower. So I'm just going to OK that. It may be now that is sufficient to pass over to accounts department for them to then raise the payment certificate as required within the due date, which you can see is coming up there. That's in line with, again, with the terms for that subcontractor. But if I just OK on that occasion, in my situation, it's actually going to prompt me for a second level of authorization. Now, this is optional, doesn't have to happen. even if the second level is there, it doesn't need to involve you because it could automatically pick up on the contract manager, for example, that's set on that contract. So there can be two levels, they can be automatic, they can just be selectable, or you can just have a single level, your choice. So I'm just going to pick myself just to show you what the difference is if I use that second level of authorization. Separate menu option for the sign-off payment allows me to go in and see the to-do list. So that's only going to be those that have gone through the first stage and now require my input as a second stage. Similar looking screen to what we saw earlier, but you'll notice everything's grayed out. So there's no option to make any changes to the figures. There is an option, however, to add to or alter the notes that have been put onto the system. And there's a reject option at the bottom. So if you're not happy as the contract manager with this payment going through, you can reject it back to the QS, who then needs to do a rework, and then it comes back to you. So it's not going to get past you until you're happy, but we're leaving the figure work to the QS alone. In my occasion, I'm just going to be quite happy with that. So I'm just going to say, yeah, that's good to go. I'm getting warnings here about it being over the budget line for, or the purchase order line, I should say, for that particular element of work, in this case, the labour. Okay, having done that, there is the option for you to use the print sign-off document. This will produce a payment notification to the subcontractor ahead of the actual payment certificate. So this can be, again, your choosing as to what the document looks like. Whether you want it to form some recognition to be a pay letter or withholding notice is up to you. But it basically tells the subcontractor details about the engagement, how much the order was for. I've got the figure showing over on the right-hand side. Further down, we've got information about their claim. So they've claimed 2,200. You are allowing or approving a value less than that of 1,800. Further down, there can be an indication as to the notes that you've used to specify why that's happening. So that's a document ahead of the payment certificate itself, which can be sent out via email to the subcontractor, giving them the option to be advised of what's going to be paid and maybe take up any dispute resolution on that. After the 7 days or whatever period of time you allow before you raise the payment, you can then go in as an accounts user. You'll go into subcontractor postings. You'll go into the post transactions where I earlier did the application, but this time I'm going to do a certificate. And the certificate I'm going to do is going to be based upon an authorized entry. In other words, something that's already gone through that AOP process, the authorization of payments. So that means as an accounts user, I'm not having to scratch my head and work out what on earth I'm paying because it's already been furnished by the QS and the contract manager. But again, I'm being told about things that maybe haven't been acted upon, such as the insurance coming up. So the figures are already in place based upon what the QS has put in. I do have some leeway here as an accounts user to alter some of the figures. So there are in white some areas that I can make alterations, things like the VAT, for example. I've got the ability to alter the taxable amount. So if there wasn't a split between labour and materials, for example, and you now need to recognise that only part of the value is subject to CIS, then you can make a reduction on that particular column without having to worry about having to add another line just for that purpose. The contra could be used as well. So if you want to reduce the payment, then that can be done. So then passes into a contra control account for you to deal with subsequently. But on this occasion, I'm not going to have to do anything. I do have the option to reject it. So if I was overly worried about that insurance, for example, then it could be rejected right back to the QS, who then needs to do a rework before it can come through to the rest of the system. But I'm just going to say OK to that. Update. And that will make the actual posting through the system and make a payment ready to be made. Okay, the certificate payment update can be used. Interaction here with Ross, for example, for RCT can allow you to make notification to Ross as to the payments you're about to make, so they can advise you the prevailing rate. If I go through the certificate payment update for UK purposes, it's going to recognise if I haven't done any verification. So in other words, it doesn't know what rate of CIS to use. So there are checks in place and other interactions with the other areas of the system for compliance. So I'm just going to say, yeah, I'm going to pay that particular certificate. It's going to create a BACS file. So I've set the payment method against the subcontractor to be paid by BACS. That will allow you to produce a bank-friendly file format. So whether you're with Barclays, NatWest, Bank of Ireland, Allied Irish, you can have the file set as it will come out in that bank format. So you can then upload it or import it through your own banking software without having to do any rekeying. The payments and remittances then section can be used to create the payment certificates. I've only got a single one in here, but this will give you an idea of the payment cert that you can use. And again, this is just an out-of-the-box suggestion as to what the payment cert could look like. We can easily add your company logo to the blank space in the top left there, for example, but you can have it displaying the information that you want to see. the deductions being made. There's also there the reverse charge statement. I mentioned that as compliance for the required reverse charge VAT regulations. So that can be applied and being shown where that's relevant. Okay, again, storing the document, the payment's been made. That is now included alongside. And then the other option there is for printing the payment, will create that BACS file that I was talking about. Okay, we can look at what's been happening to the system elsewhere now. So if I were to return back to my subcontractors, for example, we could see through the pie chart any other involvement we've had with our subcontractors. So ABC, for example, we could go to the subcontractors. We can maybe go to the transactions, and we'd be able to see everything that's happened on that particular subcontractor, okay, including the new involvement we had today. So there's our new entry being placed as an invoice at the top there. If I scroll across, I've got the documents. It's got a paperclip indicating that there is a document associated with that posting. And then I've just retrieved the image of the invoice you saw me post through Invoice Register. Okay, elsewhere, we could go in on the subcontractors, maybe pick up on the UK ducting option, go into that subcontractor record. I can access here the individual postings through the transactions again. Sort this. If you want it pre-sorted, so it always has the latest to the top, then once you've sorted it and you save it, it'll remember that's how you want it sorted. So you don't have to remember to always sort it yourself. And then associated with that, we've got the postings, the documents. So there's your payment certificate you just saw me raise in association with that payment. Okay, so all that information is updated and being kept in your subcontractor's ledger. There'll also be visibility of it, of course, throughout other areas of the system, particularly your contract ledger. So if you're wanting to do a report upon your contract activity, you could use analytics as an example to show you contract performance. So this is showing me all my contracts and whatever figures you want to show. So I want my full actual cost, not just subcontractors, everything to do with that contract is in one place. If I wanted to drill down on that, I could then go down and say, okay, see it's 36 grand plus. If I go into it, I want to see what the cost analysis is. And I will need to see that broken down by my different cost head groups. Subcontractor supply fix has got 21 grand sitting there. So if I click on that, I'll be able to open that up and show me by my individual subcontractor trade codes, if that's how you've chosen to set your cost heads up. Access beneath that, and you'll be able to see the postings that have gone on, including that top entry for the certificate I just posted and approved through the authorization of payments. There's the documents link, which will from here. So even though I'm in the contract ledger, browsing on a contract report, I do have access to all of this documentary evidence to support it. It's up to you how you present that information. As I say, the analytics is free format, basically. We'll give you suggestions as to how you want the information or may want the information presented. You can then make changes to it and your own further additions should you wish to. So that summarizes really our subcontractors ledger. I hope you found it a benefit this morning and got something out of it. Any other questions or observations, please feed those back to us. We'd be more than happy to entertain those with you on a one-to-one basis. But in the meantime, I'd like to wish you a very good morning. So thanks for attending. Bye now.